Hello. In this subunit, we'll talk about data. We'll talk about what's the difference between structured data and unstructured data. So, what is data? Well, we see it all the time. We have seen it in all kinds of websites, mobile devices, on our computer, even outside of online world. Here's one example. Um, Here's a data that's it's a GDP data from World Bank. And I'm sure you've seen something like this, or there's a spreadsheet with some kind of country information, and here's the columns are years, and then there's a GDP, right? So this is one kind of data which is quite common. We encounter in many places. Here's another example, and again, this is a spreadsheet where this is SAT data from a New York City open data site. And again, you can see different school names here, their SAT scores, and so on. This is an example of what's called structured data, because here all the data fields, in this case, such as school name, the SAT score, and it's broken down into reading, math, writing scores. So those things, those numbers are marked. There are those fields that are marked. And so this is an example of structured data. Here's another example. Now, this is a blog example where there are some things that are defined, but most things here are what's called unstructured. So they're not, they may appear to be organized, at least on the layout, but the fields are not marked, they're not presented in a way that shows predefined kind of data. This typically happens with text, right? So here you can see that in a blog there is likely to be text, but also as a combination of text and images and so on. Um, and I'm sure you've seen something like this if you've spent any time on the internet, something like YouTube, where it's multimedia data, right? And we say it's multimedia because it's primarily video, but there is also mix of text and often images and other source of data that's combined at this one place. Right? So there are different formats here, there are different structure here. Some of that is structured data, the things that are marked, and other are unstructured because they're not well defined. They're free-flowing texts and tags and other things. Okay. And here's an example from another social media site that you may have heard about, Twitter. So again, here some things are marked clearly, some things are not. So it's a mix of all um, kind of different formats and data. So there is the basic unit, a tweet is text, but then that also includes links and often videos and images, things like that. Right? So some of the things are structured, some others are not. So of course now we've seen these examples, we can provide a more sort of a formal definition and understanding of what the structured and unstructured data are. Okay. So structured data is where you have some kind of a high level of organization, right? And this typically happens in relational databases, spreadsheets. We saw some example of spreadsheets, right? So that's what defines some data as structured data. Uh, Here's an example from it's a data schema or data model from MySQL, which is a structured query language. And you can see here there are these are, and it's okay if you don't know SQL or never used it, but essentially these are different tables, right? So there's departments, employees, salaries, titles, and so on. And for each of those tables, there are some characteristics of the data that would go into it, right? So for instance, when you're talking about an employee, there's going to be their birthday, their first name, their last name, gender, hire date, things like that. So these are defined labels, right? In order to describe an employee, you have a predefined set of labels that goes into that data. Okay, so the structured data will depend on a data model that's typically already defined. Okay, and that definition, that data model, tells us how the data about, for example, employee should be stored, presented. Okay, and so the nice thing is, because there is a predefined data model where somebody tells us how to store that data, it's easy to enter that data, it's easy to store it, and it's also easy to retrieve from it, because now you can ask a very specific question. For instance, you can ask, give me the record of an employee named Jane Doe. Okay, and so you're able to say first name Jane, last name Doe, from that employee table, because those fields, first name, last name, are defined, right? So for instance, if you want to find out how many employees will be um, retiring in the next 5 years, you could query this employee table using the birth date, right, to see to find out their age and use that information. So you're able to specifically ask for a field because those fields are defined. So that's a nice thing about structured data, that since the data model is defined, a data model is present, all those fields are defined and can be easily stored, queried, retrieved, analyzed. Unstructured data, on the other hand, does not come with those kind of labels, does not come with the predefined data model. And so here's an example. Here's a Wikipedia article, or this is a screenshot of Wikipedia, but a lot of things on Wikipedia, those articles, they have free flowing text. Now there could be markup text that defines the formatting of the tags. It could be images, videos, links, but um, those things are not going into specific predefined data model categories, such as what we saw before in the employee record, right? And so photos, graphic images, videos, PDFs, emails, all those things tend to fall in unstructured data because the data is being generated, stored, but they are not going into specific data fields. Okay, so that's sort of the unstructured data. When it comes to social media, we see a mix of both. So we see things like this, where here's an example where we've collected this data for Brexit, right? So based on the hashtags that are used. So these data that are basically tweets, and we can represent them using this kind of numbers and say, okay, well, how many tweets are using hashtag Brexit? How many tweets are using hashtag vote leave, and so on. And so this is an example of structured data because we're looking for a specific, we're able to look for a specific thing and count them, right? And we're able to look for specific things because they're in the structured format. Um, then there is unstructured, of course, there is a lot of text. And so when you're looking at a lot of text, which is not clearly labeled, you need to do different kind of analysis. You need to do different kind of representation. So here's an example of text where you can do sentiment analysis. And this is where um, it's not, you have free flowing text. It's not defined if something is somebody's name, if something is a place, a time. It's just text. And so we can simply count or compare. So when it comes to something like sentiment analysis, that's done on this kind of a unstructured data, right? Um, so typically, structured data helps us do a lot of number-driven quantitative analysis. Unstructured data, we end up doing. You can still do quantitative analysis, but there's also a lot of qualitative questions that you can ask. In this course, we'll be focusing on structured data. Most times, the data that we'll derive will be of that nature, and so we'll be doing mostly quantitative analysis. Okay, so what we did in this subunit, we talked about structured data, which is where the data fields are defined and the data is organized according to those fields or labels. Right? So there is a pre-existing data model. And unstructured data is when this kind of data model does not exist. There are no predefined organizing scheme. So that's the main difference. And in this course, we'll be mostly dealing with structured data. Okay. All right, so that's the end of this subunit.